Hello! Welcome to another episode of Ancient Office Hours by the Ozymandias Project. Trireme Transit is now boarding for all new and returning passengers. Now departing, present ponderings. Next stop is Ancient Office Hours at a library lost in the sands of time.
Hey everyone, and welcome to episode 25 of Ancient Office Hours. It was my great pleasure to sit down with Dr. Andrew Reinhard, who is currently the Director of Publishing at the American Numismatic Society. He previously served as Director of Publications at the American School of Classical Studies at Athens and holds a background in archaeology, having excavated in both Greece and Italy. Furthermore, he is one of the leading scholars in the field of video game archaeology, which is most commonly referred to as Archaeogaming. His book, Archaeogaming, An Introduction to Archaeology in and of Video Games, was published in 2018. We discussed his path from book collecting to publishing, how he productively channeled his academic rage, his path to becoming a pioneer in archaeogaming, and looked at some of the various ethical and funding challenges of working with gaming companies. Enjoy this thought-provoking conversation, and I'll speak to y'all soon. Thank you so much for joining me this morning.
Oh, thanks for having me.
And just to start us off, can you tell us a little bit about yourself and how you got interested in classics?
Yeah, my name is Andrew Reinhard. I'm currently the Director of Publications for the American Numismatic Society, and I've been working from home for a year and a day as of today. Before that, I was the Director of Publications for the American School of Classical Studies at Athens, with offices in Princeton. I did that for 4 years. And before that, I was the Director of e-learning for Bolchese Carducci Publishers. So for those of you in the classics world who focus on Greek and Latin pedagogy, I was responsible for things like the iPodius, MP3 store for digital audio, or eClassics, which was a social network for Latin teachers. You know, that's back when I was regularly attending things like ACL and the Institute and CAMWS and all of the fun stuff that I really don't do anymore, which is really sad because I miss it. As far as getting interested in classics, my dad actually threw a copy of Homer at me when I was a child. But he's like, yeah, you're going to read all about the labyrinth. And I'm like, oh, cool. And then I read it. I'm like, where's the labyrinth, Dad? But I still liked it, you know? And so I read the Odyssey, read the Iliad. Just kind of fell in love with the stories and the characters and the mythology. I took a classical literature class in high school. Our high school was fortunate enough to have like AP track. So as an English elective, I could take classical literature. And again, I was an idiot. Didn't know that classical literature meant Greek and Latin classics, right? And translation. And so I showed up and I'm like, aren't we going to read like To Kill a Mockingbird or something? And they're like, no. But I stuck it out, and it was really interesting. And so ultimately I got to college, I started taking Latin classes and found I was a terrible Latin student. I was awful at it. I don't know if I was worse than the class, but I was pretty far down. But again, stuck with that, learn the language, and then ultimately, following in classical archaeology, started to read ancient Greek, especially as it related to like pottery inscriptions, epigraphy and stuff like that. And so I was like, okay, this is cool. And I just kind of grew into it. And then becoming a publisher in classics and in classical archaeology, all of a sudden I started learning all this stuff by osmosis almost, because I was reading articles and manuscripts for books from all of these just wonderful people who are publishing on this stuff, and that you can't help but learn. So yeah, it's been kind of a lifetime approach, often by mistake, but those mistakes often reveal that there's something really interesting there, and you might as well just kind of hang out and follow that thread, if we can mix metaphors.
Yeah, for sure. If we can just like roll the tape back and think back to when you were pretty young, did you always love mythology and stories, or like have a vested interest in them, just sort of vaguely, or were you much more into sort of some of the more contemporary stories?
I was actually drawn to stories of ancient Greece and ancient Rome specifically. I also liked, things like folklore, like old folklore. Reading, the unabridged Grimm's fairy tales, for example, and getting creeped out by those. And then I was young enough to be able to appreciate as a child, the first Clash of the Titans film, and then one of my favorite movies as a kid is Jason and the Argonauts, and basically, all of these Ray Harryhausen type things with the claymation or stop motion kind of animatronic thing, where it was just amazing to see like skeletons fighting and real people and stuff like that. It just blew my mind, and I'm like, okay, this is really cool. So let's keep digging in. Let's keep figuring this stuff out. My grandmother gave me a set of books on mythology of the world, 12 volumes. And so it's like, every month or so I'd pull a new one off the shelf and would go through and read it. And they were illustrated and for kids, certainly. But at the same time, like, boy, this just opened up an entire world of, myth and wonderful fiction and amazing stories that, blew my mind. I'm like, this is really what I'm interested in.
Yeah, I love hearing a little bit about what people were into as kids, just because I've found some people have had really similar experiences. So I think I've had a couple people who they all said, "Oh, I had the Baudelaires like big anthology book of myth and stories, and that's how I got into it." And I think as people had said that, I think I remember it in my school's library, and I think I might have checked it out a couple times. I have a very vague memory of Baudelaire because I think I remember like people talk about its illustrations, like they were there because it had great illustrations, and I think I vaguely remember that. But as silly as it sounds, for me, I had a lot of the Asterix and Obelix comics.
Oh, cool! Yeah, of course.
Like they're not super classical, but it was growing up. I went to the French School of Chicago, and so they're originally French, and so when they wanted us to read things, they were like, "Well, okay, fine. You can read it because there's a lot of text, but it also is a comic, so we'll let them have some fun." Yeah. So I grew up with those, and they had Caesar in them and the Romans, and I just thought it was the coolest thing.
We would have like asterisk in our language classes.
Oh, really?
Yeah. So, like in German, we have the German version of asterisk, or in Latin have the Latin version of asterisk. And, it's just, something like a treat. You finish your work, and if you finish early, you can read asterisk in this language. And I'm like, okay, this is cool.
Oh, that would have been really cool, because it was between that and Tintin, all in French. Oh, yeah. And to this day, I still have this great section on my bookshelf to my right, and you see like, I think I have almost the whole collection because they're numbered on the sides. So I have all the little numbered Tintins right next to all the little numbered asterisks.
This is cool because as we grow older, we can finally start to afford a little bit, things that we wanted to collect as kids. If the parents got you the wrong stuff, or you just didn't have the money for it. One of the things that I'm after right now, I collect editions of the Odyssey because I loved this story as a kid, and now I like to get different editions. And the one that I'm after, I have a reproduction copy, but I'm looking for the original of the Odyssey, illustrated by N.C. Wyeth, because you talk about just amazing art and cool images that are interspersed throughout the text, and Wyeth's art, for that edition it's astonishingly good, and I love it. And so one day I'll find it. I don't want to like go onto Ava Books or something. I want to go into a bookstore and like discover it on my own. That's the rule I've set for myself. So wherever I go try to go to an old bookstore and see if they've got a copy.
Yeah. Oh, that's the best feeling. Honestly, if I could, I would just kind of sit here and collect books. I mean, I kind of do anyway, just because, basically I have, 2 huge piles of books on my desk that keep growing, that it's a problem because I don't have room for them on my shelves, which is why they're on my desk. Mm-hmm. My parents are like, you need to really stop acquiring more books, just use the library. And I'm like, you don't understand, that goes against, I keep trying to make them understand, if you're a classicist in any way, if you study the ancient world, all you want to do is collect books. I mean, this is our equivalent to collecting old scrolls, right?
Oh, for sure. It's the life of the classicist, and it's just in the DNA that thou shalt collect, you will accumulate paper. And it's not a problem. I mean, I have a home library, and I'm just kind of sitting in the middle of it, as you can see behind me on the screen. And this is just the back wall, and it goes that way and it goes that way. And it's like art history, archaeology, classics. And this is my happy place. I come in here and sit.
I have my prized collection of classics books kind of on one level, and then I
Uh-huh.
have my Egyptology books on another one, and then I have my fiction books, but all that have to do with Greece and Egypt. So
Oh
the
yeah.
Percy Jacksons are back here. So, I have what I call the nice bookcase or the bookshelf of all the things I've collected from my studies, which are a lot because that is a huge bookcase. And yeah, I have, well, I only have the one copy of the Odyssey. I wish I was cool enough to collect multiple copies, but I just have the one.
That's just me. I wouldn't call it cool. It's just a strange thing, especially the kind of weird hero that he is. He's controversial and complex and kind of a jerk. And but that's interesting about Greek mythology and the Greek gods and the Greek heroes is that they're all messed up. They're they're all of them have problems. There's nothing perfect about any of these things, and I think that's really interesting about this kind of world mythology is that, especially with the ancient Greeks, it's just they have issues.
Yeah.
They all need therapy.
They all
Rehabilitation.
not even that. They all just need like real mothers. I don't know. That's maybe so Freudian, but I'm just like they have godly parents, but gods famously are terrible at parenting. So I'm just like, well, if you had like real good mommies and daddies, then you just wouldn't be so messed up. And
you're absolutely right.
But as a in your capacity as a book publisher, does that make you want to acquire and read more books than you have to for the job, or has that turned you into like, oh, no, this is so many books already, I need to just like cool it?
I keep my professional book life separate from my personal book life, if that makes any sense. Last year, because of the pandemic starting, officially in March, I started working from home, and I had the opportunity to really like wrap up a bunch of projects. And so I think last year we published 8 books, which was some kind of record for the American Numismatic Society. And these monographs, they're typically the low end is like 300 pages, and the upper end is about 700. And these are highly technical publications. They've got catalogs of coins, they've got hundreds or thousands of images and plates and everything. And so I didn't know what to do with myself, so I'm like, I guess I got to do some work. And I'm not a numismatist, I'm an archaeologist. I was a pottery guy. And for those of you of your listeners who might know what else I do, I do digital archaeology and video game archaeology, and so this is a far cry from all of that. So I'm learning a lot about coins whenever I read, but I don't buy these for myself because I don't have that kind of interest on a personal level that I do in a professional level. I've got I guess my recent acquisitions, some people might be familiar with Simon Stolenhook. He's a Swedish illustrator. If you guys watch Tales from the Loop on Amazon Prime, that was based on his books. And so he does science fiction art books where it's like an imagined past populated with artifacts from the future, and it's set in like rural Sweden. So you're looking at like these robots resting in a field in Sweden, and it's like, oh, that's awesome. So collecting kind of sci-fi books like that, art books like that, photography, and then as far as fiction goes, it's been William Gibson, Neil Stevenson, Cormac McCarthy, just this kind of, it's like dude fiction, dude science fiction, for better or worse. And that's I've been getting through their life's work before going and finding something new. Mostly it's science fiction and fantasy on the personal side, and then the work stays at work.
Yeah. And so just for the young classicists out there who maybe don't want to go into academia or don't know how, or they need something before they can get to where they want to, can you talk a little bit about how you got into publishing, and were you able to find not only a publishing job, but something that was directly related to classics, and then something that's now classics adjacent?
Sure. Yeah, the career trajectory has been real interesting. And a lot of this has been by necessity, but also driven through love. I finished my master's degree at the University of Missouri at the Columbia campus in 1996, doing Greek pottery.
Sorry, that's when my proud Mizzou roots come back. And
Yeah, no, I
roll to the
enjoyed my
front.
time at Mizzou. I had classes with Kathleen Slane. My advisor was William Beers. I had a seminar. The only seminar in which I ever cried was at Marcus Routman's seminar on late antiquity.
Really? Oh my
Oh
gosh,
yeah,
no, because I've taken like 4 classes with Dr. Outman and I love him. And I don't think I've ever done worse than an
yeah.
A- in his
No,
class.
it was my first kind of graduate level seminar, and there were 2 students in the class, and we would alternate. It was basically art in the age of Justinian, and so my first presentation, which was supposed to last like 2 hours, I was woefully unprepared, and I was told this, and I was embarrassed. It basically said, "You'll come back next week and you'll do it again." I just got out of that room and just started bawling. It's like, man, yeah, he was super thorough, very tough but fair, super encyclopedic and all of that stuff. But that was a tough department. After my master's, and again, this is another kind of true confession, is that Beers, after I defended my thesis, the following day, he's like, "Come and see me in my office." I'm like, "All right." He's like, "I'm not going to recommend you for a PhD program." Okay, so what the hell do I do now? So I worked in retail for a year, the museum company, because I had worked at the Nelson Atkins as a summer intern. I worked at the University of Missouri's Museum of Art and Archaeology for the 2 years that I was there as my work study. I liked museums, I liked archaeology still, and so I did that. I did what I called a working holiday by going to the site of Isthmia at Greece. I did a season there with Ohio State, which was awesome. After that I got a job at a museum software company called Willoughby Associates, and I worked there for 10 years doing the help desk, doing client services, training museum professionals how to use relational databases. So again, archaeology adjacent, museum adjacent, learning technology, learning how to use Oracle, how to use Access, PHP, Apache, web services. So all of this technical stuff at the same time, working with people who are working with actual artifacts. And then after 10 years, I got the job at Bolchesi Carducci doing their digital stuff. Again, maintaining classics roots. And this is because I was in the Chicago area. Willoughby was in Evanston. Bolchesi Carducci was in like Mundelein. So it was just an extra 10-minute drive for me or whatever. So I just switched over after a couple of weeks vacation and did that for a few years. And I learned the publishing business from Lou Bolchesi and from Marie Bolchesi. I was able to build a network of classicists and fellow archaeologists over that time, doing social media, Facebook, which I don't do anymore because it's evil. Twitter a lot. And so I set up a Twitter account, I think in 2007, 2008, just started building the network and talking to people and maintaining these professional and personal relationships through that. The Rogue Classicist and the Classics listserv was a godsend. And so it's fun to participate there back in the early days of that. And I still haven't met David Meadows, but one of these days, interact once a week, but we've never met. So there's that. And then following Bolchesi, I saw that the American School was advertising for a director of publications. And I'm like, maybe now is the time for me to make the jump back into archaeology and to lead a publishing house. I was not their first choice. I was not their second choice. I was the third choice. But the other two, there are issues. One person got another job somewhere else and used it as leverage, in the interview process. Another person did not pass the vetting process. Then it was me. So I'm like, it's like they threw me a bone. So I got really, really, really lucky, passed my probationary period, and then stayed there for 4 years, and then got the job at the American Numismatic Society, because I continued to build the network of archaeologists, classicists, and other people working in digital humanities at that point. So I guess the long story short is, a lot of these are, just opportunities that I wanted to explore, things that happened by accident, things that I heard about through my network. This all came about because my advisor didn't think I was good enough for a PhD. Well, the joke's on him. Yeah, I got my PhD last year from the University of York in archaeology, specifically archaeology of digital things. And so I joke that it took me 20 years to find a topic. And I guess it kind of did, because I couldn't have done the PhD, now like I did back then. So anyway, I kind of did things backwards. I had a career first, went back into academia. Here I am. That's a very long story.
I think it's really unique though, for sure. And it probably never feels good, right? When you have an advisor come to you and just say, no, you can't do this.
I was miserable. I was too utterly depressed and destroyed. And thinking back on it, he was probably right. My thinking wasn't mature enough. I wasn't a very good writer. Yeah, I wasn't ready for the next step. And so he actually did me a favor. It took me some years to find out that that's what he did, but he did. And by doing so, he set me on this other path outside of academia that's been really rewarding.
Yeah. And for all the young people out there who are kind of struggling with maybe this in-between area of, am I good enough to go on in my studies? What advice would you give to someone who's sitting there kind of dealing with that current fear of, oh no, I think I'm not going to get in anywhere, or I think I'm just going to be told I can't make it?
I think a certain level of self-doubt and self-questioning is good. I think it's normal. I think that if you don't have that, maybe there's something wrong. You can't be all confidence. You have to. And again, I was, people who knew me, 20 years ago, I was a fool. And I hope I've changed since then. Yeah, nothing teaches like experience and time. If there's a question, send that application. Try that interview. Again, this is not, me being first in anything. This is me like being second, third, or out of the running, and then finally, finding some way to get in because I really wanted to do this. And if you really want to do something, then leverage your network, build your network, be a good person, help out. This is what I've been trying to do now as well, is anything I can do to help. Now that I'm in an established position, it's like, if I can help somebody, I will. Whether it's mentoring or editing or putting people in touch with other people, there's something to be said about being a good citizen, being a good colleague. And once you've gotten to a position, to help others get to this similar position. And, as we're talking, like right now, the American School of Classical Studies is hiring an assistant editor for the journal Hesperia. And this is great for an early career researcher. You don't need a master's. Really great. This is a rare opportunity. So people should apply. If they have any questions about working at the American School, they can talk to me or write to me or whatever. I'll let them know what that's about. It's a good team there. So anyway, any advice is, if just try it. If you're doubtful or hesitant, just try it. Do the interview, do the application. If anything, it's practice. Every interview you do, every application you send, you should get a little bit better at it. Hopefully you'll get feedback from the institution who's receiving this stuff. I know that's rare these days, which I think is bad manners. And if you don't hear back, write to them. It's like, hey, why did you choose X over Y? How could I have done better? And then, try again. But, don't give up. If there's a roadblock that gets put in front of you, that's also okay. There are plenty of other things to do. And I guess if you have that goal to set out way far ahead of you, you can kind of take this roundabout way, and everybody's, journey is going to be different. But, you can keep your eyes on the prize, and hopefully you'll be able to work your way back to it, while at the same time, trying to enjoy what you have at the present. Coming from a position of privilege or what, but I felt like I had to work for all of this stuff.
Yeah, isn't it better though that you got to where you are because you had to work so hard?
Yeah, I had a chip on my shoulder. So it's just like, let's go. And having my advisor, like, not progress me, that fueled a kind of inner rage. Like, I'll show that guy. And, that's good. If you can channel the rage in a productive way, great, do that.
Now I have to ask, have you ever thought about finding that old advisor and being like, hi, here I am.
Well, I haven't visited him in the cemetery because he died like 2 years ago of Alzheimer's.
Oh no.
But I did dedicate my PhD thesis to him.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
I that's nice. I like that. That's
it's throwing a little shade on the shade.
That's a great story. Oh yeah, I was told I couldn't do it by this one dude, and then when I finally did the thing, I dedicated it to him. It's Absolutely. All because of him.
It kind of was.
Oh, that's great. That reminds me of my best friend from college. She wanted people desperately to take her seriously, and she figured that people just wouldn't do so. She's always been very economically and politically minded, and so she thought no one would take her seriously unless she stubbornly decided to get her undergrad in economics. And I was like, come on, you're gonna put yourself through all that just so what you think people will take you seriously based on your major? And she was like, yeah, that's exactly what I'm gonna do. So she ended up doing the thing. And so when she graduated, she triumphantly takes her degree and says, I have the BA in economics, so you will take me seriously because I look smart. But anyway, you have this focus on digital humanities, which is very different from, physically, looking at a bunch of cool numismatic books. I personally don't know anything about the ins and outs of numismatics, but I will say that my final undergrad class back in 2018 was with Dr. Marcus Routman, the man, the myth, the legend. And he gave me the choice to pick whatever I wanted to for my final project. And I said, okay, I don't want to write about, I think it was a class on it was just Byzantine art and archaeology, I believe. And I said, well, I don't want to write about one of these many churches. That's just boring.
Yeah.
You know, they're incredibly beautiful, but I was like, I don't want to write on this. So I chose to write a whole paper. This is like 20 pages. It's like 20 pages long on the changing iconography Byzantine coins during the iconoclasms. I don't know why I chose that. It was really random, but I just remember thinking, I like coins. I like numismatics. I just think it's interesting. No one seems to do that here. I'm going to do it. And then, proceeded to write a 20-page paper on it. But digital humanities is a completely like different, separate thing. But, I see people cataloging and digitizing things more and more, like images of coins, because I wouldn't have been able to write that paper unless I had access to the internet, and then I could go on it and find all these digitized pictures where I could zoom in. So how much digital work do you get to sort of see going on in your current position?
Numismatics, as we know it today, could not exist without its digital components. They're hand in glove. And one of the greatest things about the American Numismatic Society, and I can say this not just as a staff member, but also as a user, is the fact that it has its Mantis search engine, tied into numismatics.org, where you can search nearly 1 million numismatic artifacts in the collection. About 2/3 of those have high quality, high definition images assigned to them. This is all cultures, all points in time, all geographic regions. And then we've got partnerships that are funded by, the NEH or the Mellon Foundation and other places that have allowed us to collaborate internationally with like the National Library of France or the Coin Cabinet in Berlin and other museums around the world that have similar collections, where we can create this ecosystem of linked open data so that people searching on a particular emperor's bust, for example, they'll see coins from the ANS's collection, but also coins from these other collections too, brought together. And, we have a number of different initiatives, like Pella. We've got something for the Antigonids, something for the Ptolemaic coins, something for the Roman Republic, something from the Roman Empire, all of these different areas that allow researchers to go in and find what they need right away. I mean, in the good old days, and I can say this as a grad student who was going to school in the mid-90s, I had email, but that was it. The internet hadn't shown up at Missouri's campus until I graduated. So we were still using card catalogs. We still had to visit museums and visit coin collections in person, book time, take a look at these things by hand, which I still recommend. But if you don't have that luxury, if you're not able to afford it, having these things available as high def images online is a lifesaver. Absolutely. These digital humanities tools and methods have really advanced numismatic studies, light years beyond what they were. It's just new ways of seeing and access to all of this information, including, open access and open source monographs, journal articles, and the like too. So, we try to make all of this as open and as free and user-friendly as we possibly can. Personally, that's what I think scholarship should be doing. Get everything out of the silo, allow scholars to communicate freely and, use, their data freely, in this kind of exchange.
Yeah, definitely. Obviously, that's only half of the digital work that you're interested in. In terms of the other component that maybe some other people would know you best for, the Archaeogaming half.
Yeah.
Can you talk a little bit about, what prompted you to write your book, Archaeogaming? Because I think, some people are familiar with the term, but they don't know there's a book, one, and then two, they're just like, well, how do you write a book on this?
That's the question. Now, there are, a few other people who had been doing this, before I started working formally in video game archaeology. Ethan Wottrell at Michigan State, for example, I think wrote the first peer-reviewed published article about using classics-oriented video games or archaeology-themed video games in the classroom as a pedagogical tool. And this is like, 15, 20 years ago at this point. So people have been looking at this stuff. Colleen Morgan, who's teaching at the University of York now, had published, information about working in Second Life and has done other things with games as well. So you have these kind of original gangsters, out there who are in the wilderness publishing, things here and there. I came to it because I really liked the idea of lore and ruins in games. Why does this game have all this lore? Why are these ruins here? This is archaeology. And then kind of turn the corner to think that video games or interactive digital entertainment are themselves archaeological artifacts, sites, and landscapes. And I didn't really see a lot of people writing about that. And so I'm like, we should probably codify this. And so I came up with the term archaeogaming, for better or worse. What else to do, what else to call it. So I just called it that. And it was heavily weighted towards digital games, but I would like to include analog games in that as well. Gaming through history, gaming through time from all these other cultures too. Sure, why not? Let's open the tent, And so I created the Twitter handle Archaeogaming, and then the website, I did archaeogaming.com, which is a blog that is now run by Caitlin Kingsland who's a PhD candidate in Florida. And I just started writing the book. At the same time, I was writing my PhD thesis. So I'm kind of writing two books at the same time. Yeah, it was just important to say, okay, video game archaeology is not just about Tomb Raider. It's not just about how archaeologists are perceived in games or by game designers, or how archaeology is portrayed in games for players, with like the looting mechanics and the ethics and stuff like that. That's all part of it. But I wanted to make sure that the other part was handled as well. You're basically treating games as like examples of modern digital material culture, almost like a globalized cultural heritage. And how do we preserve that? How do we communicate that? How do we do an archaeology of digital things? How do we conduct an archaeological survey and excavation inside a digital environment, a virtual world, or a video game? Now, I don't know. So let's figure it out. I did the PhD because I wanted to see if these ideas were good enough. So I did it more for the research than I did for any kind of personal gain. It's like, all right, well, I think this is a thing. Let's put it to the test. So, enrolled in the PhD program, my advisor was Sarah Perry. One of my examiners was Jeremy Huggett, who is Mr. Digital Archaeology. I tried to do the PhD as openly as possible, where any research I was doing, I put online. Any abstracts, any papers I was working on, I put openly online. Working drafts, final drafts, whatever, to have it out there, because it's important for the community to kind of participate in this peer review that's open. If my idea sucks, I want you to tell me before it's too late so I can fix it. I can read. If I'm not reading the right things, tell me what to read. If I've said something that's bad, help me make it better. And I'll do the same for you. So it's very much a give and take, again, which is what I think scholarship should be. It's communication, it's helping each other. And with the Archaeogaming community, we found each other, which is interesting because there are a lot of people, same time I was doing this, they're like, hey, I thought I was the only one doing this. And then there's somebody else, in like Sweden, it's like, hey, I thought I was the only one doing this. Or somebody in Brazil, hey, I thought I was the only one doing this. And so we make a community, and now we have a community of practice, and it's diverse, it's multinational, multilingual. Finally, we have people in Japan doing this. There are people in India doing this. There are people in South America doing this, as well as North America, UK, and Europe. And it's just been awesome to watch this kind of grow. And there are people I don't even know now. In the beginning, it was a small community and everybody kind of knew each other, went to the same conferences, published in the same places. And now it's just big. And this is like, oh, thank goodness. So it's healthy. It's in good hands. People are doing a lot of interesting work. And it's just awesome to support them and to see what they're working on.
Yeah. And how do you combat a lot of these attitudes that, maybe parents and people would have, which is, yeah, it's great and all, but it's still a video game. And I don't, some of these games can be violent, like the Assassin's Creed games. Obviously, they have certain solutions like the Discovery tours that they're working on. I think the overall thing is, my parents, for example, they didn't let me have any gaming consoles growing up because they were like, it's going to mush your brain. Nothing good will come of you playing video games. You cannot have them. You're going to read books and go outside.
These are classic examples. My parents said the same thing. My mom more than my dad, because my dad used to take me to the video arcade. He'd give me like a fistful of quarters, and then I sucked at video games as a child. And so, I'd blow through them in like 10 minutes. And he's like, you're done already. But my mom was very much of, it's like, go outside, read a book. And I did. I went outside. I read books. Sure. My dad got my brother and I an Intellivision for Christmas one year in the 80s. We wanted an Atari 2600 because that's what our friends had. But no, we got the Intellivision. Great. Thanks. But we played it and it was fun. With those games, you could invest a half hour, an hour or something in a particular game, and then you're kind of done. You've beat it, or you got as far as you could, and then you have to do something else, as opposed to like Assassin's Creed, where you've played for 100 hours and you might almost be done with the main quests, and the storyline and stuff. So, things are different now. But games are just part of the vernacular at this point. We have to engage with them as examples of modern media. To me, they're examples of built heritage and built cultural heritage and intangible heritage too. You have all of these communities, that have grown up around these games. You've got these shared experiences. People are treating these as like a second home, in a way, especially for these building games. You play Minecraft and you're building things for yourself and for your friends. Playing other games, played a lot of Fallout 76 over the pandemic. And so there you can build a camp and you can just make these elaborate constructions that follow you around, whenever you log in. And it's time, it's energy. I can spend actual real money on things, to put into the game. And so you have these economies, you've got cultures of gamers that are tied to a particular video game or franchise or something. And this is all archaeology. This is modern archaeology, it's contemporary archaeology, but we're kind of asking the similar questions and, seeing how people behave in games and what they build and make for themselves, how they work as a community, all of this stuff. And it also gets into preservation issues too. How do you document or save, something that is digital, that is ephemeral? And we have to deal with primary sources, which are the games, and secondary sources, which are things like wikis and Reddits. It's just a new way of doing things on a very accelerated timeline. It's not just games too, it's any software. We can treat it in this way, people's homes away from their homes. This is where we spend most of our lives, in front of a screen. And if that's the case, then we're kind of living there, and we might as well treat these as archaeological spaces.
I would say a lot of these aren't just reserved to archaeologists and classicists, right? I mean, there's so many, yes, historical games, which are really nice because they bring the ancient world to life, but something as simple as one of my first video games, quote unquote, was I got the PC version and then all the expansion packs for the Sims games. There was a lot of Sims 2 in my life when I was younger. And I was thinking about that the other day because I think a friend of mine was like, oh, I miss playing Sims. And I was like, oh, right. That was like a thing. It was so popular. That could be like an anthropological thing, right? I mean, sometimes I ponder all the players who, if you ask them, oh, were you the player who tried to do everything right? Did you use cheat codes to just get all the money? Or my favorite are the people who say, well, I was kind of a terrible person and did things that I would never do in real life, like lock everyone in the pool or a room, take the doors away, and just let them all die in there.
Oh, for sure. We learned so much about human behavior, especially when we're kind of operating in God mode, when we can do stuff like that. From an archaeologist's perspective, if I'm in a game, I am looting everything. I am breaking all the jars, I'm taking all the artifacts, and I'm selling them. I don't do that as a normal archaeologist or regular natural world archaeologist, but in a game, I'm just terrible. And I know that makes some people really mad. Yeah, it's in the game, it's part of the mechanic, I'm doing it. It says so. The game's morality says I can do this, and I keep that separate. It's not like, if I play, like Red Dead Redemption 2, shooting up the bad guys, I'm not doing that in the real world, but I'm doing it in the game. We have those arguments. You can, do that all day, but that doesn't necessarily translate from one to the next. And there are other people who are doing research on, does this actually happen? How do games that portray a culture or cultural heritage, what do the players do after they play the game? How does it affect their interpretation of, modern culture, whether it's Native American culture or, ancient Japan or whatever? How do we interact, with those sites and those collections and museums and descendants, after we've played the game and have a certain idea given to us by a designer or developer.
Where in a perfect world, I guess, how do you see this field progressing? And, how do we break that last barrier of how do we convince teachers to use it in schools? That's something that I spend quite a lot of my time on, as someone who's between undergrad and grad school, because I won't get there until next year. Hope, fingers crossed. So right now I'm kind of relegated in this weird, like, independent scholar position just by virtue of I'm in between things. So, I'm like, give me a second, guys. I'll be there soon. But yeah, in the meantime, I've been working on developing our own Archaeogaming modules for classroom use. But I think that the biggest resistance I find is, teachers just kind of saying, well, how is this really going to do anything? I don't really want to do that.
Yeah, understood. I mean, it's going to be personal preference for one. And I found this when I was doing e-learning for Volchese Carducci as well. And the fact that, not all students are going to have access to hardware, whether it's a fast computer or a console or a phone even. Not all students are going to be able to afford a game. If they want to do homework or projects at home for this kind of stuff, requires an instructor to be literate in games and gaming. How these consoles work, what these games are, how do you play them? So, it puts a lot on the teacher. And then there's privilege involved as well, again, with affordability, the access to technology and all of this too. So it's really hard, especially if you're working with secondary education. Higher education, things might get a little easier. Moving forward from a pedagogical standpoint, I think instructors need to guarantee that their students will have access. The teachers need to themselves be comfortable with it. Or if they assign projects, one of the projects could be, a student chooses a game and writes a paper on it, or writes their own game using Twine or Ink or one of these other open source platforms. It's just part of a thing, for an end of semester project. And other students could write a paper, other students could do some kind of media or whatever. And then, the instructor can, have their rubric and, measure the output against whatever that rubric is. We can certainly make options available, make things accessible, make things easy to use, from a student's perspective as well as from an instructor's perspective, and kind of move forward with that, as with anything digital. And we've seen this in the pandemic too, where internet connection is spotty in certain parts of the country or certain parts of the state, fast for other, parts of the population. There's not equity, not equality technologically. This is a problem for doing remote school, lag or latency issues, and other kinds of things, that are kind of compounding on this. I mean, I like the idea. I like to give the idea as an option for students to choose if they have that kind of access. Okay, fine. But any kind of requirement, I think there are problems, and that's not just at games, but just at technology generally.
Yeah, it seems to me that a lot of these obviously are connected to funding, which is something that the humanities are always struggling with anyway.
Yeah.
So for something like this to work, because if the end goal is to make studying the humanities and ancient world adjacent fields, if we're trying to make them engaging and fun and interactive, the way that I believe children respond to better than just, read this in some dry book. This issue of not everyone is going to have the technology is definitely a big issue. But in terms of funding, do you see it as, well, if we can make a good argument, should this be something that we take to that governmental level, or is this where you see kind of a public-private partnership where if we get private investors, donors who say, hey, I believe in this, I will give you as a school or you as a business providing this stuff, I will give somebody money so that way you can give the school and make sure at least every classroom has a console. So even if you can't accommodate like asynchronous learning at first, you can say, well, you can do synchronous learning altogether because we'll make sure that you have this. But obviously that requires people with the money to then give other people money.
Yeah, you get into funding and that's got all kinds of problems just because, depending on where the funding comes from, there's going to be restrictions or requirements. And, advertising is like bringing Coke and Pepsi into school. All of a sudden, are you a Coke school or a Pepsi school? You should not have either, in my opinion. You should have the freaking water fountain. But that's just me being an old man. Get off my lawn. It's the same kind of issues, with this moving forward. I think any school will benefit from technologies. When I was in high school and junior high school, the school got funding or donations from Apple. We got a bunch of Apple IIs, that came in, or we had, Commodore 64 or TRS-80 computers that were put into a lab, for students to use, which was great. Being able to have those hardware and to build those labs, because it's important to build digital literacy in the students. Students need to know how to use computers. They should know how to program. They should know how things work. I can talk to my kid. She doesn't know how stuff works. She just knows that it does. And I'm like, no. And so I look at my upbringing and understood, what's inside a computer. We understood, how to make the software do stuff, how to make music, how to do digital art. And why is this even possible? Almost from like a physics perspective. It sounds like me going on this like kids today rant, but I think that's all part of digital literacy too, because if something happens, we need to be self-sufficient in how to repair this stuff, how to use this stuff. And yeah, it's hard. I mean, certainly I do think it comes down to a literacy issue, making sure the students understand how to use the stuff, making sure the teachers get the training that they need in order to understand these platforms, understand what's being used on the platforms, and also to be in touch with what their students are into and how you can bring that in, to the class without excluding other students who don't have that literacy. That's always, kind of a typical problem. I can make a pop culture reference and half the class will get it, half the class won't. That can be an opportunity to have a dialogue. Sure, it's hard. There's not an easy answer for this.
For sure not. I mean, this is a huge issue, but I mean, yes, obviously, especially with government funding, there's going to be a lot of restrictions, a lot of, walk us through the process. Tell us where our money's going, because a lot of this is like taxpayer funded stuff. And with private donors, I would imagine definitely much of the same. Where is our money going if I'm going to make this donation? So is this somewhere where the entertainment industry and academia have been so terrible about talking to each other and working together? And, I believe that that's definitely got to change. So is there any good that can come of, maybe you get a big company like Ubisoft? It's $1 billion company. It has a ton of money. And guess what? Their entire existence relies on they need people to buy and play games. So, can you go to a company and be like, hi, can you help us out? Because we will get people to play your games if you give us this.
Yeah. There's ethics. There's ethics involved there that are complicated. This is one of the reasons why I think Ubisoft went ahead and did the discovery tours, which is the non-violent walking around ancient Greece or ancient Egypt things that they did in consulting. They did in consultation with historians. They did in consultation with archaeologists. A couple of friends in Greece who actually wrote different sections of the discovery tour, for Assassin's Creed Odyssey. And then, I'd been in conversation with the full-time archaeologist they employed during the creation of that game. So, they're trying to put their best foot forward in order to make these experiences. And I think you can get the discovery tour outside of the game. So you don't have to buy the game. You could just get the tour if that's what you want to do. And then you can demo that in class or whatever on a screen. But I haven't seen this yet, but I would love for games companies that create historical games to set up these kind of grants or micro grants. Schools or districts or states or individual teachers can apply saying, I want to do X, can I have money for X, or can I have access to the software for Y? Go forward like that. On the other side, there are a few archaeologists and historians who have connections, with gaming companies that deal with historical games like Rockstar, for example. So, they make Red Dead Redemption, which is set in the fictionalized American West, but they try to lend a lot of authenticity to clothing design, weapon design, environment design, and all of that stuff. And so, you can work with them as an academic, but at the same time, realize that this is a for-profit company. That's the reason to be, as you mentioned, is to sell games, to get people to play the games. And so they're going to have to draw the line at some point between authenticity, historicity, entertainment, because ultimately that's what it is. You have to have that collaboration, maybe to bring in some good ethics, and, maybe not loot everything, maybe be sensitive to the cultures that are represented in your game. Okay. And to kind of guide, the companies like that, but they're private, so they don't have to listen to you. A lot of them don't want to listen to you. They just want to make their game. Okay, that's fair. If they're a company, they're private, but hopefully they'll listen.
Yeah, I mean, I think it brings up way more questions than it does answers, unfortunately.
Oh, yeah.
But I mean, most good things do. So this is unfortunately where you've given me an opening to sort of not only plug my company, but also ask a little bit about our future role, because this is something we spend probably every day of our lives thinking about, which is the Ozymandias Project as a small company with our Archaeogaming program. That's one of the things kind of we are seeking to feel out and see if there is a space in the world for something like us, which is like to be eventually we'd like to be that intermediary between schools and academics. They're busy already, so they don't really have time to be going and talking to big gaming companies. But, that's where something like we come in, which is where we would create the connection. We are a business, so then that's two businesses talking to each other, one. And then is there a space for something like us where, okay, if we talk to the companies and we work out something, we would go to schools and say, hey, we can customize the stuff for you. We got access to it. You tell us what you want. And our role would be to take what they give us, and then we would do something with that to make it school okay. So then that way we can sell it back to schools and be like, hey, schools, we have this thing. It's not coming straight from the gaming company. We've made sure to make ethical arguments and the like. Now we have a nice finished product that is completely school okay.
Yeah, I do think there's a space for that middle part. The big mystery is how to get anybody to answer the phone or to return an email at a AAA game studio. If you can figure that out, you're 90% there. Your average instructor isn't going to know how to do that or where to begin. So having somebody to go to and saying, hey, can you help me with X, I think is a really good idea. And then there are other games and gaming companies where you could make contact pretty easily. So, for example, the company Dig It Games, if you're familiar with them, they do I came in touch with them back in Bolchese days, because they had like the Pompeii excavation game where you could learn about archaeology and history and everything. And now they do, things set in a historical and cultural setting for things like math and stuff, which is cool. It gives you a different perspective. And so, you're working there. And because they're a smaller company and they deal with education specifically, it's much easier to get a response and to put people in touch and to, maybe even develop something together. I don't know. So yeah, I do think there's a home there. And, if you're working towards, ethical solutions, to pedagogical problems, specifically focused in the ancient world, I think that's a great way to go. Certainly use digital tools and materials, to supplement, whatever, a particular teacher has on the syllabus. So yeah, I do see a way forward. I do think there's a future in it. Absolutely. But, you always have to keep in mind the lowest common denominator for, internet speed, access to technology, hardware, software, just to make sure that nobody, gets left in the dust or feels like they're being left out. They want to participate because it's fun.
Yeah, just kind of with that, would you consider video games, like the making of them, whether that's you have a hand in certainly the technical parts, but even sort of like writing and historical consulting, do you consider video game creation as a whole? Can that be considered like a STEM field?
I think it's a STEAM field. Can't leave out the A. You always have to have arts and humanities together, hand in glove with science, technology, engineering, and math. You cannot, in my opinion, you cannot have one without the other because they inform each other. For me as a student, I was taking, science classes, math classes, programming classes, along with art, taking AP English, in that classical literature course and stuff, because I was interested in everything. And it's all of a piece. I mean, these are all human endeavors. STEM and the arts and digital humanities and regular humanities and all of this stuff, they have to be taken together because they're all human pursuits. Programming and with coding, with game creation, that is a great educational tool because you're allowing people to create stories. You're allowing people to attempt to do historical recreations, if they're doing 3D modeling, things like that. A lot of the modern games, they use photogrammetry. So, they scan objects and bring them into the game and into, Unity or Unreal Engine or something like that in order to create these worlds. Well, that's a great way to understand something about it. If you are making something, then you are learning the history, you are getting into the nuts and bolts. And, I mentioned Colleen Morgan earlier, her work with Çatalhöyük, for example, in building houses using digital tools really allowed her to address archaeological questions. Sean Graham at Carleton University, he's really big on this too, especially with pedagogy. And he finds that his students really learn the best when they make things. Game creation, whether it's through Twine or other narrative software. And there are a lot of open source platforms now that allow you to do visuals. Great. learn that, use that. You'll come to some interesting conclusions.
And so since we've established that these are very interconnected, because I fully believe that science and the humanities go hand in hand for anything, why do we think that we separate them to the point where a lot of people in the humanities feel, they don't want to apply for STEM funding? And is it also a problem of STEM funders and people in STEM just don't think of them as interconnected, which is why they don't even open up the avenues for humanities people to apply?
I don't know. I've sat in on at least one grant review board for the NEH, for their Office of Digital Humanities, and there it was cool because people were integrating technology with humanities. I don't see how they're separate. I can't speak to these other elements or other granting agencies or private funders or anything. I just don't know what their perception is. So I'm a little hesitant to project. The fact that STEM exists as its own thing outside of the humanities and the day-to-day stuff that you read or that you listen to, I think speaks to a fundamental problem in how the humanities are perceived. It's like the left brain and the right brain are completely separate, which is not the case. I mean, we use both hemispheres together all the time. So, I don't see why science, technology, engineering, and math and humanities can't inform each other. I don't see how we can read, Lucretius and not go into the science side of things to figure out, is he talking about correct, not correct? Where is this happening, rather than just treating it as a primary Latin text, so from this author. So, and then on the flip side, having that humanities experience, being grounded in art and art history and archaeology and literature and music, all of that can inform, what people are doing on the science, technology, engineering, and math side of the spectrum. I think that we'll find that things are a lot more interesting and a lot more ethical also when the humanities get involved with that side of the equation.
Yeah, I think you raise a lot of really great points that could a dissertation in and of itself. A lot of the things we've been talking about, I mean, they're
several,
yeah, they're so interesting. So, I think the answer right now for all of us is to keep thinking about better solutions. These are not easy things that I don't think are going to be resolved anytime soon, particularly. Yeah. At the end of each podcast, I ask every guest to read the Shelley version of Ozymandias. And after you read it, if you could just give us your quick thoughts on what does this poem evoke for you? Why is it so powerful? Anything really.
No, I love this poem. I'll tell you why after I give it a whirl here. I met a traveler from an antique land who said, "Two vast and trunkless legs of stone stand in the desert. Near them, on the sand, half sunk, a shattered visage lies, whose frown and wrinkled lip and sneer of cold command tell you that its sculptor well those passions read, which yet survive, stamped on these lifeless things, the hand that mocked them, the heart that fed, and on that pedestal these words appear. My name is Ozymandias, King of Kings. Look on my works, ye mighty, and despair. Nothing beside remains round the decay of that colossal wreck. Boundless and bare, the lone and level sands stretch far away." It just gives me chills every time I read it, because it's funny because, who heard of Ozymandias before reading this poem? Right? So the poem itself stands as a monument to memory. This is just kind of a classic example, a very well-written example of you can't take it with you. Everything decays. We talked before we started, this podcast about how everything tends towards a state of entropy. Things fall apart, to paraphrase, another famous poem. This is it. This is the way the world is. You too shall be forgotten. Everything that you thought was awesome, just going to be dust in 1,000 years from now. Nobody's going to remember. Nobody's going to care. They'll just look at these things as like archaeological curiosities poking up into the present from the past. And, to me and a lot of friends of mine who are archaeologists, that's really interesting, how the past presents itself in the present and how do we interpret that. So, and this is also a good kind of memento mori of scholarship, right? You mentioned my Archaeogaming book, which came out. I started writing it in 2016. It came out in 2018. I've already changed my mind on a lot of stuff that's in that text. And, I am hoping And one of the reasons for publishing was that people could change it. I publish my work to put it out there because I want people to argue with it or change it or use it to grow or advance whatever. I fully understand that what I do is the start of a conversation and not the end of a conversation. So having the statue of Ozymandias here is a good reminder that that's what you're doing. Everything that you think is awesome, everything that you do, that it'll be there for a while and it's going to change. And, that's okay.
Yeah, you definitely hit the nail on the head because that's exactly how I interpret it as well. So also, caveat then, are we going to eventually see an updated version of the book?
Depends on the publisher. I've let them know that I want to do a second edition, that'll include one of the criticisms, and I think this is a good criticism of the book, is that it doesn't deal with environmental labor and impact, and it doesn't deal with human labor and impact, game creation, design, and use. Those are two major omissions that I want to put back in, or put into the text for the first time. I can't explain why I didn't do that. I just didn't think of it until somebody came along and said, "You dummy, you know how much electricity that stuff uses? You know what the burden is on crunch for developers? It's all of a piece." So yeah, I definitely want to add that stuff in.
Awesome. Well, I will hopefully be on the lookout, and hopefully one day I'll see we have a second edition coming and order it.
Yeah, there's plenty to do to update it already. It's good as it is, but anything good can be better.
Yeah, for sure. Everything can be improved in some manner, I think. So the last question I kind of ask every guest, because I just love the diversity of responses, is if you consider our modern culture and society today, is there anything that could be considered a modern Ozymandias? What is something that we think is the be all end all amazing, awesome thing that will last 1,000 years now, but realistically in 2,000 years we'll look back and be like, that wasn't that great?
Well, I could look at the past administration. I really don't like to say his name himself as Ozymandias, being all grandiose and full of pomp and vulgarity. There he is, and I'm so hopeful that, his monuments are already being taken down. His casinos are already being destroyed. They imploded one in Atlantic City a couple of weeks ago. And every time that happens, I'm delighted. But that's just me politicizing and sharing my opinion. But, so I would say that. But, there are other, kind of classic works, especially as we go back as scholars and reevaluate past scholarship, which is, I think, the duty of any scholar. Any contemporary scholar needs to look at the past literature and see if it holds up, see, how the arguments changed, has the evidence changed when we're talking, about the Me Too movement or Black Lives Matter, or being more inclusive, in scholarship and in the academy. All of this has a bearing on how we evaluate that past scholarship. And we're realizing that it needs to be updated, that they're, super colonialist attitudes, misogynist attitudes, racial attitudes that were a product of the time, but and should be acknowledged. But moving forward, we could do better. These monuments to scholarship, whether it's Gibbon's Rise and Fall of the Roman Empire, or other things, by individuals who have this checkered past or awful past now. We need to go back and revisit that stuff. And it's not a cancellation or anything by any stretch. It's basically, what evidence do we have now, and how can we improve our arguments, moving ahead? Titanic works have to be reconsidered, reevaluated, and challenged. And I think that's up to us. And they're not going anywhere. They'll still be there. They'll still be the parts of the statue in the sand. So it's not like we're wiping them from the face of the earth. We're not. They're there, and they are there to be engaged with by modern scholarship.
That's a great answer. Yeah, I have very similar feelings, but I won't torture my listeners with my opinions again for the 10,000th. Yeah, so I just want to thank you again for joining me. It's been such a pleasure to be able to talk and soak up some of your wisdom and experience.
Yeah, wisdom in quotes. You're too kind. No, I appreciate this. I've told you things I haven't told anybody else, so now the listeners will will all benefit from that.
Well, I'm very honored then.
Yeah.
Trireme Transit is now departing ancient office hours. Next stop is Present Ponderings. I met a traveler from an antique land who said, 2 vast and trunkless legs of stone stand in the desert. Near them, on the sand, half sunk a shattered visage lies, whose frown and wrinkled lip and sneer of cold command tell that its sculptor well those passions read, which yet survive, stamped on these lifeless things. The hand that mocked them, and the heart that fed. And on the pedestal these words appear: My name is Ozymandias, King of Kings. Look on my works, ye mighty, and despair. Nothing beside remains. Round the decay of that colossal wreck, boundless and bare, the lone and level sands stretch far away.